All right, folks, welcome back to part two of the social process and control theories of crime presentation. We're going to continue now with neutralization theory, which is the last of the learning theories that we will be discussing this week. So, neutralization theory is going to be associated with Sykes and Mazza's techniques of neutralization and Mazza's drift theory. Now, these researchers argue that most criminals are still partially committed to the dominant social order. So according to these researchers, youths are not immersed in a subculture committed to extremes of either complete conformity or complete nonconformity. Instead, these individuals um, drift between these two extremes. So here's a good quote, right? The delinquent transiently exist in a limbo between convention and crime, responding in turn to the demands of each, flirting now with one, now the other, but postponing commitment, evading decision. Therefore, he or she is going to drift between criminal and conventional action. So, while still partially committed to conventional social order, youths can drift into criminal activity and avoid feelings of guilt for these actions by justifying or rationalizing their behavior. So, why is it going to be called neutralization theory? And it's because people justify and rationalize behavior through neutralizing it or making it less serious. In other words, individuals make up situational excuses for behavior they know is wrong, and they do it to alleviate the guilt they feel for committing such immoral acts. So, these two researchers developed methods or techniques of neutralization that people use to justify their criminal behavior. And these techniques allow people to neutralize their criminal and delinquent acts by making them look as though they are conforming to the rules of society. And individuals are then free to engage in criminal activities without serious damage to their self-image. And these are the 5 techniques of neutralization. They're going to be denial of responsibility, denial of injury, denial of the victim, condemnation of the condemners, and appeal to higher loyalties. Now, I'm not going to get too into them for the sake of time, but Scram and Tibbets do elaborate on them. Now, we're going to apply these techniques of neutralization to corporate crime, right? So it's been applied in white-collar crime, these techniques of neutralization. So several studies have examined the tendency to use such excuses to alleviate guilt for engaging in behavior that professionals know it is actually wrong. So the study on decision-making of the 133 students that I previously mentioned, right? The 133 students in a graduate business program found, this study found that not only did neutralizing attitudes have significant effects on the respondents' decisions to commit corporate crime, but the older students, particularly those with more seniority and experience in the business world, they were more likely to employ techniques of neutralization. So, with that said, studies of corporate crime have identified 2 more common types of excuses that white-collar criminals use in their illegal activities. Specifically, these 2 techniques of neutralization that our experts have observed primarily among corporate criminals are, first, defense of necessity and metaphor of the ledger. So, defense of necessity is going to imply that an individual should not feel shame or guilt about doing something immoral as long as the behavior is perceived as necessary. Now, often with within the corporate world, the climate puts pressure on the bottom line, and all that matters is making a larger profit. So, no matter what the behavior, no matter what behavior is used, criminal activity is often going to be seen as necessary as long as a profit can be generated. Now, the other neutralizing technique that was primarily found in the corporate setting, again, the metaphor of the ledger, is essentially the belief that an individual or group has done so much good that he or she is entitled to mess up by doing something illegal. Now, what have previous studies said about, or studies said about this theory? So, several studies have attempted to test neutralization theory, and they've come back inconclusive. So, for example, Robert Agnew, a name that you should be familiar with from previous weeks, argued that there are essentially 2 general criticisms of studies that support this particular theory. So the first challenge is that several researchers have improperly measured the acceptance of neutralization techniques. So based on his research on neutralization among incarcerated adults, there was one particular researcher that noted the relationships between vocabularies of motive and criminal behavior are more subtle, complex, and situation specific than previously recognized. The major tasks for subsequent neutralization research are to empirically distinguish between neutralization and unconventional commitment. Now, another important thing here is that researchers have expressed concern that criminals may use techniques of neutralization before committing a criminal offense, so prior to the criminal offense. So this ordering, again, temporal ordering, is just as plausible as when neutralization follows a criminal act. So this uncertain time order problem is due to the research being conducted at one point in time. So when it's cross-sectional, so that creates a problem. So now we're going to transition into the control theories. Those are the learning theories. Now, the learning theories that we previously discussed assume that individuals are born with a conforming disposition or at least a blank slate. Now, on the other hand, control theories assume that all people will naturally commit crimes if not for restraints on the selfish tendencies that exist in every individual. So social control perspectives of criminal behavior therefore assume that there is some type of basic human nature and that all human beings exhibit antisocial tendencies toward being violently aggressive and taking from others what they want. So such control theories are more concerned with explaining why individuals don't commit crime or deviant behaviors. Specifically, control theorists will rhetorically ask, what is it about society, human interaction, and other factors that causes people not to act on their natural impulses? So there are several early control theories that I personally am not going to get too into. Schramm and Tibbets elaborates on them, but the first one is Thomas Hobbes' social contract, which we covered. I believe it was week 3 of this course in the chapter 3 presentation. So this is probably going to be the earliest form of social control in explaining some type of deviant behavior. And it was in the 17th century during the Enlightenment period, again by Hobbes. Then we have Durkheim's idea of collective conscience, which again, here are some main points, and you can further research it in the text. We have Freud's concept of the idea in the superego, which we have previously discussed in the chapters that have to do with the psychological foundations of crime. And then now we're going to discuss, and this one I'll elaborate on, is some early control theories of crime. So the ones that I skipped over were the early control theories of human behavior, but I will elaborate on the early control theories of crime. So it was throughout the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 1960s, the criminologists started to borrow and build some of the ideas that were that I did not necessarily discuss, but which you will read upon on your own. Up until that time, into the 50s and 60s, most research in criminology was dominated by the learning theories discussed earlier in this course, which were the social structure theories, right, like Merton strain theory or the Chicago school perspective. While early control theories may not be particularly popular in this day and age, they were important because they laid the groundwork for future theoretical development, right? So they got the ball rolling. So the first one we're going to look at is Ries's control theory. Now, according to Ries, Ries claimed that delinquency was a consequence of weak controls that resulted in weak ego or superego controls among juvenile probationers. So Rees assumed that there was no explicit motivation for delinquent activity. Instead, he claimed that it would occur in the absence of controls or restraints against such behavior. So Rees believed that the family was a primary entity through which deviant predispositions were discouraged. Again, going back to that first picture in the title slide. In addition, Rees claimed that a sound family environment would provide for an individual's needs and the essential emotional bonds that are important in socializing individuals. Another important factor in Rees's model was close supervision, not only by the family, but also by the community. Rees claimed that individuals must be closely monitored for delinquent behavior and adequately disciplined when they break the rules. So then we have Tobey's concept of state and conformity. So in 1957, Tobey proposed a theory of delinquency and gangs. Tobey claimed that individuals were more inclined to act on their natural tendencies when the controls on them were weak. He claimed that such inclinations toward deviance were distributed equally across all individuals. Also, he emphasized the concept of a stake in conformity that supposedly prevents most people from committing crime. So the stake in conformity Tobey was referring to is the extent to which individuals are invested in conventional society. In other words, how much is a person willing to risk by violating the law? So most importantly, studies have shown that stake in conformity is one of the most influential factors in an individual's decision to offend. For example, individuals who have nothing to lose are much more likely to take risks and violate others' rights than are those who have relatively more invested in social institutions. So there is a distinguishing feature of Tobey's theory, and it's the emphasis on peer influences in terms of both motivating and inhibiting antisocial behavior. Depending on whether most of one's peers have low or high stakes in conformity. Then we have Nye's control theory. So a year after Tobey introduced the stake in conformity idea, Nye proposed relatively comprehensive control theory that placed a strong focus on the family. So Nye claimed that no significant positive force causes delinquency, because such antisocial tendencies are universal and would be found in virtually everyone, if not for certain controls usually found in the home. So Nye's theory consists of three primary components of control, and that first component is going to be internal control, which is formed through social interaction. Now, this socialization, he claimed, assists in development of a conscience. So Nye claimed that if individuals are not given adequate resources and care, they will follow their natural tendencies to doing what is necessary to protect their interests. The second component of control is direct control, which consists of a wide range of constraints and individual propensities to commit deviant acts. Direct control includes numerous types of sanctions, such as jail and ridicule, and the restriction of one's chances to commit criminal activity. The third component of control is indirect control, which occurs when individuals are strongly attached to their early caregivers. For most children, it is through an intense and strong relationship with their parents or guardians that they establish an attachment to conventional society. So Nye suggested that when the needs of an individual are not met by caregivers, inappropriate behavior can result. So as you can see on the bottom of your screen in that figure 10.6, Nye predicted a U-shaped curve of parental controls in predicting delinquency. He argued that either no controls or too much control would predict the most chronic delinquency. So he believed that a healthy balance of freedom and parental control was the best strategy for inhibiting criminal activity. There is some recent research that supports Nye's prediction. So now we're going to look at Reckless's containment theory. And this theory emphasizes that inner containment and outer containment, which can be viewed as internal and external controls, This particular researcher claimed that individuals can be pushed into delinquency by their social environment, such as by lack of opportunities for education or employment. Reckless pointed out that some individual factors, such as brain disorders or risk-taking personalities, could push some people to commit criminal behavior. He also noted that some individuals could be pulled into criminal activity by hanging out with delinquent peers, watching too much violence on television, and so on. Now, Reckless described a visual image of containment theory, which is presented here on the slide. Now, the outer circle, which is circle 1, the yellow, in the figure represents the social realm of pressures and pulls, whereas the innermost circle, the blue one, circle 4, symbolizes a person's individual level pushes to commit a crime. So in between these two circles are the two layers of controls, namely external containment, which is circle 2, which is like the darker green, and internal containment, which is that aqueish color. So some studies have shown more general support for containment theory. Others have shown that some of the components of the theory, such as internalization of rules, seem to have much more support in accounting for variation in delinquency than do other factors, such as self-perception. So in other words, external factors may be more important than internal ones. In addition, some studies have noted weaker support for Reckless's theory among minorities and females. Thus, the model appears to be most valid for white males. So now we're going to look at more modern social control theories.